For many years, audiences around the world laughed at the wild and chaotic adventures of the Bundy family on the famous sitcom Married, with Children. The show became one of the most memorable television comedies of its time. Viewers loved the sarcastic humor, the constant arguments between family members, and the outrageous situations that the characters found themselves in every week. At the center of the story was the Bundy family, led by the frustrated shoe salesman Al Bundy and his very unusual family. One of the most popular characters on the show was Kelly Bundy, played by a young actress named Christina Applegate. At the time, Christina was only a teenager when the show first started in 1987. She quickly became famous for playing the funny, carefree, and sometimes clueless daughter of the Bundy family. Fans loved her personality and comedic timing, and her character became one of the defining parts of the series. However, while audiences enjoyed the comedy on television, very few people knew what was happening behind the scenes. Christina Applegate was still growing up while working on a very popular television show, and the experience was both exciting and challenging. Hollywood can be a difficult place, especially for young actors who suddenly become famous. The pressure of working long hours, dealing with media attention, and trying to balance personal life with a growing career can be overwhelming. During those early years, Christina was only 15 years old, and she was learning how to handle a new world that was much bigger than anything she had experienced before. This is where Ed O'Neill, who played her on-screen father Al Bundy, became an important part of her life. While the audience saw him as the grumpy father who constantly complained about his family, behind the camera, he was something very different. Ed became a quiet protector and mentor to Christina during her teenage years on the show. Over time, the relationship between them grew far beyond the normal relationship between coworkers on a television set. Instead, it slowly developed into something that felt much more like a real father-daughter bond. Christina would later reveal in interviews that Ed often looked out for her in ways that most viewers never knew about. He paid attention to how she was feeling on set, made sure she was comfortable with the scenes she had to perform, and stepped in when situations felt too mature for a teenage actress. At a time when she was still figuring out who she was, Ed's presence gave her a sense of stability and safety. While the show continued to grow in popularity and the Bundy family became a household name, this quiet bond between Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill continued to grow stronger. What started as a simple professional relationship slowly turned into a lifelong connection built on respect, kindness, and trust. When Christina Applegate first arrived on the set of Married, with Children in 1987, she was stepping into a world that moved much faster than the life of a typical teenager. At 15 years old, most young people are focused on school, friends, and discovering who they are. Christina, however, suddenly found herself surrounded by cameras, scripts, producers, and an entire television crew who depended on her performance every week. The show itself was very different from other family sitcoms of that time. While many television programs tried to show perfect families with polite conversations and happy endings, Married, with Children was built on sarcasm, arguments, and bold jokes that often pushed the limits of what was considered normal for television. Christina's character, Kelly Bundy, was written as a beautiful but somewhat naive teenager, and many of the jokes about her character were based on her appearance and carefree personality. Playing this role required Christina to deliver lines and perform scenes that were sometimes more mature than what most teenagers would experience in everyday life. For a young actress, this environment could easily become confusing or uncomfortable. Fortunately for her, Ed O'Neill understood these challenges better than most people on set. By the time the show began filming, Ed was already an experienced actor in his early 40s who had spent years learning how the entertainment industry worked. He knew that fame could be exciting but also dangerous, especially for young performers who were still learning how to protect themselves. Because of this understanding, Ed quietly took on a role that went far beyond simply playing Al Bundy on screen. He began watching out for Christina the way a responsible parent might watch over their child. According to stories Christina shared later in interviews, Ed often paid attention to how conversations on set were happening and whether they were appropriate for someone her age. If jokes or discussions became too adult, he sometimes stepped in to change the direction of the conversation or make sure that Christina did not feel uncomfortable. These actions were not dramatic or public. Most people on the set probably did not even notice them. But for Christina, those moments made a huge difference. They helped her feel that someone was looking out for her in a place that could sometimes feel overwhelming. Ed also made sure that she understood the professional side of acting. He encouraged her to take her work seriously, learn from each scene, and respect the people around her on set. In many ways, he helped guide her through the early stages of her career. Other cast members on the show, including Katie Sagal, who played Peggy Bundy, and David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, also formed a strong bond with Christina, but Ed's role was unique. Because he played her father on screen, the connection between them naturally mirrored a family dynamic. Over time, the lines between acting and real life began to blur in a positive way. The Bundy family might have been loud, chaotic, and full of jokes on television, but behind the scenes the cast slowly became something closer to a real family. Christina was growing up in front of millions of viewers, and while the audience only saw the humor and exaggerated characters, the reality behind the cameras was that she was learning life lessons from the people around her every single day. Ed O'Neill's quiet support during those early seasons helped create an environment where Christina could focus on her work without feeling alone in a very demanding industry. That support would become even more important as the show's popularity continued to grow and the pressures of fame became stronger for everyone involved. As the popularity of Married, with children continued to grow during the late 1980s, life on the set became more intense for everyone involved, especially for a young actress like Christina Applegate. The show quickly developed a reputation for its bold humor and its willingness to challenge traditional television norms. While many sitcoms at the time focused on wholesome family values, Married with Children presented a completely different type of family dynamic. The Bundys were loud, sarcastic, and often openly critical of one another, which made the show stand out from anything else on television. Audiences loved this fresh style of comedy, and ratings for the show continued to rise. However, success also brought increased attention from critics, media outlets, and groups who believed that the show's humor went too far. One of the most famous controversies happened in 1989 when an episode titled "Her Cups Runneth Over" sparked public outrage among some viewers who felt the content was inappropriate. The backlash quickly grew, and several advertisers decided to pull their commercials from the show. At one point, there was even serious discussion within the network about whether the program should be canceled altogether. For adult actors who had already spent years in the entertainment industry, dealing with criticism and public debate was difficult but manageable. For a teenage actress who was still learning about fame, however, the situation felt much more frightening. Christina later explained that during that period, she often felt anxious and uncertain about the future of the show. She worried about what would happen if the series ended suddenly, and whether the controversy would affect her career. During this stressful time, Ed O'Neill once again stepped forward as a calm and reassuring presence. Instead of allowing fear and rumors to dominate the atmosphere on set, he encouraged the younger actors to stay focused on their work and not let the public controversy affect their confidence. He reminded Christina and her co-star David Faustino that their responsibility was simply to perform their roles as best as they could. Ed also spoke to reporters and members of the media, explaining that the show was meant to be satire and that the actors themselves should not be blamed for the reactions of critics. His willingness to defend the younger cast members helped shift some of the pressure away from them. Christina has said that during those moments, she began to understand the value of having experienced mentors in the entertainment industry. Ed's calm attitude showed her that difficult situations could be handled with patience and professionalism rather than panic. Eventually, the controversy faded, and the show continued to air successfully for many more years. In fact, the public debate ironically made the series even more famous because it drew attention to its unique style of comedy. For Christina, however, the most important memory from that time was not the media coverage or the ratings success. What stayed with her was the feeling that someone had been willing to stand beside her during a moment of uncertainty. The experience strengthened the bond between her and Ed even further. By supporting her through that challenging period, he demonstrated that his concern for her well-being was genuine and not simply part of a professional obligation. This period also marked an important stage in Christina's personal development. As she continued to grow older and gain confidence in her abilities as an actress, she began to see Ed not only as a protector, but also as someone she deeply respected as a mentor and friend. Their relationship had started with simple acts of guidance, but now it was becoming a meaningful connection that would continue to influence Christina's life, both on and off the screen. As the years passed on the set of Married, with Children, the relationship between Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill continued to grow in ways that went far beyond the normal relationship between two actors working on a television series. Christina was no longer the nervous 15-year-old who had first arrived on set unsure of how to handle the pressure of fame. Instead, she was slowly becoming a confident young woman who had spent most of her teenage years learning the craft of acting in front of millions of viewers. During this time, the cast and crew of the show spent long days together filming scenes, rehearsing lines, and preparing each episode for broadcast. These long hours naturally created strong bonds among the people who worked on the show. However, the connection between Christina and Ed remained particularly special because it had started during such an important time in her life. While viewers saw them constantly arguing on screen as Al and Kelly Bundy, their real-life relationship was filled with mutual respect and quiet support. Ed often continued to check in with Christina during breaks in filming, asking how she was doing and whether she needed advice about anything related to her work or personal life. Sometimes these conversations were about acting techniques or ways to improve comedic timing. Other times they were about more ordinary issues like dealing with sudden fame, managing stress, or staying grounded while working in an industry that could easily change a person. Christina later shared that Ed never tried to control her decisions or tell her exactly what to do. Instead, he offered guidance in a calm and thoughtful way, allowing her to learn and grow while still knowing that someone was there if she needed help. This style of mentorship made a lasting impression on her because it showed genuine care rather than authority. As Christina moved from her teenage years into early adulthood during the long run of the show, she also began contributing more creatively to her character. Kelly Bundy gradually developed more personality and comedic depth, and Christina's natural sense of humor became an important part of the show's success. Ed often encouraged her to trust her instincts during scenes and to experiment with timing and delivery. His experience as a performer helped her understand that comedy often works best when actors feel comfortable enough to react naturally rather than strictly following every word of a script. This advice helped Christina build the confidence that would later support her entire career in television and film. Meanwhile, the rest of the cast also formed a close-knit group. Katie Sagal, who played Peggy Bundy, and David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, often shared the same feeling that the show's set felt like a second home. The actors spent so much time together that their relationships began to resemble a real family dynamic. This atmosphere made it easier for Christina to grow up in a healthy environment despite the unusual circumstances of being a young celebrity. Behind the bright lights and exaggerated comedy of the show, there was a quiet sense of teamwork and care among the cast members. Ed's leadership and calm personality played an important role in creating that environment. Rather than acting like a distant star, he treated everyone on set with kindness and professionalism, setting an example that others naturally followed. By the time the show reached its later seasons, Christina had become an experienced actress who could hold her own in any scene. Yet, even as she matured and gained independence, the influence of Ed's early mentorship remained an important part of her journey. The lessons she learned from him about professionalism, respect, and loyalty would stay with her long after the cameras stopped rolling on the Bundy household. By the mid-1990s, Married, with Children had already become one of the longest-running and most recognizable sitcoms on American television. For Christina Applegate, the show had essentially become the place where she grew up. She had joined the series as a teenager, and year after year viewers watched her transform into a confident young actress. Spending more than a decade playing Kelly Bundy meant that Christina experienced many important stages of life while working on the same set. She celebrated birthdays with the cast, formed friendships with crew members, and learned more about acting with each season. Throughout this long journey, Ed O'Neill remained one of the most important figures in her professional life. By this time, their relationship had evolved from simple mentorship into something that felt deeply personal. Ed no longer needed to watch over Christina in the same protective way he had when she was 15 years old, but his presence still gave her confidence and stability. The two actors had spent so many years working side by side that they understood each other's sense of humor and acting style almost instinctively. This chemistry was one of the reasons their scenes together often felt so natural on screen. Viewers saw Al Bundy constantly criticizing or teasing his daughter Kelly, but behind the scenes the actors often laughed together and supported each other's performances. During these later seasons, Christina began exploring opportunities outside the show as well. She wanted to prove that she could take on different types of roles beyond the character that had made her famous. Ed supported this decision and encouraged her to challenge herself creatively. He understood that young actors sometimes struggled to move beyond the characters that first brought them success, and he believed that Christina had the talent to succeed in many different projects. His encouragement helped strengthen her determination to continue growing as an actress. Eventually, after 11 seasons on television, the long journey of the Bundy family came to an unexpected end in 1997. Unlike many popular shows that receive a carefully planned final episode, Married with Children ended rather suddenly. One day the cast was working together on set as usual, and not long afterward the series was over. For actors who had spent more than a decade playing the same characters, the sudden conclusion felt strange and emotional. Christina later described feeling a sense of emptiness after the show ended because the routine she had followed for so many years had suddenly disappeared. The set that once felt like a second home was no longer part of her daily life. Yet, even though the show had finished, the relationships formed during those years did not disappear. Christina and Ed remained in contact, continuing to check in on each other's lives and careers. Their bond had grown too strong to fade simply because the cameras had stopped rolling. The same sense of loyalty that had defined their relationship on set continued long after the series ended. For Christina, this connection served as a reminder that the most meaningful parts of her experience on the show were not only the laughs or the fame, but the friendships and guidance she had received during her formative years. Ed's steady influence had helped shape the person she became both professionally and personally. As she began the next chapter of her career, she carried those lessons with her, knowing that the support she had received during her early years in Hollywood would remain an important part of her life story. After the end of Married with Children in 1997, Christina Applegate entered a completely new phase of her career. For more than a decade, audiences had known her mainly as Kelly Bundy, the lively and often silly daughter of the Bundy family. While that role made her famous, Christina was determined to prove that she could succeed in many different types of performances. Moving beyond a character that had become so iconic was not easy, but she approached the challenge with determination and confidence. Over the next several years, she appeared in a variety of television shows and films, slowly building a reputation as a talented and versatile actress. One of her most memorable movie roles came in the comedy The Sweetest Thing, where she showed a completely different comedic style that audiences had not seen before. She later appeared in the popular comedy film Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, which became a major hit and introduced her to a new generation of viewers. On television, Christina also earned praise for her performance in the sitcom Samantha Who, a show that allowed her to demonstrate both humor and emotional depth as an actress. These projects proved that she was capable of far more than the character that had first made her famous. Throughout this period of professional growth, her connection with Ed O'Neill remained strong even though they were no longer working together every day. The relationship they had developed over the years on set had grown into a lasting friendship built on respect and shared memories. From time to time, they would reconnect at events, interviews, or cast gatherings, and the warmth between them always remained obvious. Ed had watched Christina grow from a teenager into a confident adult, and he felt proud of the success she was achieving in her career. Meanwhile, Christina often spoke with appreciation about the guidance she had received from him during the early years of her life in Hollywood. She understood that those lessons had helped her navigate the difficult transition from child actor to adult performer, a journey that many young stars struggle to complete successfully. As the years passed, both actors continued to build impressive careers. Ed found new success with the widely popular sitcom Modern Family, where he played the lovable, but sometimes stubborn character Jay Pritchett. His role on that show introduced him to a new generation of television viewers who might not have grown up watching Married with Children. Christina, meanwhile, continued to take on interesting roles that challenged her as an actress. Despite their busy schedules, the mutual respect between them never faded. The bond they had created during those long years on set had become part of their personal history. It was not simply a memory from an old television show, but a genuine connection that had helped shape both of their lives. For Christina, knowing that someone like Ed remained part of her support system was comforting as she continued navigating the unpredictable world of entertainment. The friendship they shared demonstrated that sometimes the relationships formed during creative work can become much deeper than anyone expects. What began as an on-screen father and daughter relationship had quietly developed into a lifelong connection that would prove even more meaningful during the challenges that Christina would face later in her life. Years after the end of Married with Children, life presented a difficult and unexpected challenge for Christina Applegate. In 2021, she publicly revealed that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic illness that affects the brain and spinal cord and can cause problems with movement, balance, and energy. The announcement shocked many of her fans because Christina had always appeared energetic and full of life throughout her career. For the actress, the diagnosis marked the beginning of a new and complicated chapter in her life. Suddenly, everyday tasks that once seemed simple required more effort and patience. She had to learn how to manage the physical and emotional effects of the illness while still maintaining her professional responsibilities and personal life. Despite the fear and uncertainty that came with such news, Christina showed remarkable courage by speaking openly about her experience. She wanted people to understand the reality of living with the condition and hoped that sharing her story could inspire others facing similar challenges. During this difficult period, many friends and colleagues from her past reached out to offer their support. Among them was Ed O'Neill, whose connection with Christina had remained strong even decades after they first worked together. When he heard about her diagnosis, Ed immediately contacted her to express his concern and encouragement. His response reflected the same caring personality he had shown during her teenage years on the set of their famous sitcom. For Christina, hearing from someone who had been such an important figure in her early life brought comfort during